is not a season here. It is not something that arrives in December and leaves in March, checked off a calendar like a chore. In the Canadian North, cold is a citizen. It has opinions about how you build your house, how you drive your truck, how you say goodbye to a friend on a January afternoon, when the sun will not clear the horizon for another 6 weeks. It is not a season. It is a co-author of daily life. Consider the scale first, because the scale is almost impossible to hold in your head. Canada's 3 northern territories, Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, cover roughly 3.9 million square kilometers, close to 40% of the entire country's landmass. And into that space, across mountain ranges, tundra, boreal forest, and Arctic islands, scattered like broken glass across the top of the map, live fewer than 140,000 people combined. That is fewer residents than a single mid-sized city in southern Ontario, spread across a territory larger than India. It is the silence between communities that never quite closes, the single road that ends at a river with no bridge, the bush plane that is not a luxury, but a lifeline, landing on gravel strips and frozen lakes because there is no other way in. This is a land defined by distance, by darkness, and by a beauty that can turn on you without warning. The northern lights that pull tourists out of their beds at 2 a.m. are the same sky that, in a whiteout, can erase the line between land and air until a person loses all sense of up and down within 100 meters of their own front door. The North does not ask permission to be beautiful, and it does not ask permission to be dangerous. Both are simply true, often within the same hour. Daily culture and identity. Life here is layered in a way that surprises people who imagine the North as empty. In Yukon's capital, Whitehorse, home to roughly 30,000 of the territory's 48,000 residents, you will hear English and French, but also Southern Tutchone, Kaska, and other Yukon First Nations languages spoken in schools and government offices where bilingual signage is standard practice. In Iqaluit, Nunavut's capital, Inuktitut is not a heritage language kept alive for ceremony. It is the language spoken over the counter at the North Mart, in territorial legislature debates, and on the local radio station that still reads community announcements aloud, because not everyone in a town of roughly 7,500 has reliable internet. Politeness in the North looks less like formality and more like function. A stranger with a flat tire on the Dempster Highway is not an inconvenience to be avoided. They are a person who might freeze if nobody stops. Community here is not a value people recite. It is the neighbor who notices your truck hasn't moved in 2 days and knocks on your door to check. It is the hunter who shares caribou meat with elders who can no longer hunt themselves. It is the volunteer fire department that is, in many small communities, the only fire department there is. So why does a stranger get waved into a stopped truck without a second thought, when the same gesture might draw suspicion in a city of 5 million? Because up here, isolation makes interdependence the default setting, not the exception. The North is also, quietly, one of the more diverse corners of the country. Whitehorse and Yellowknife have both seen steady growth in newcomer populations, working in healthcare, trades, and hospitality, arriving from the Philippines, Nigeria, and India, alongside long-time Francophone communities that trace back generations. Walk down Whitehorse's main street on a Saturday, and you will pass a Filipino grocery, a French-language cultural center, and a Kwanlin Dun First Nation cultural building within a few blocks of each other. It is not integration in the abstract policy sense. It is people from radically different histories learning to read the same winter together. The rhythm of seasons. Say the word winter to someone in Inuvik in the Northwest Territories, and they will not picture a few cold months. Inuvik sits above the Arctic Circle, and from early December until early January, Inuvik experiences roughly a month of polar night when the sun does not rise above the horizon. Then, in June, the pattern reverses entirely, more than 6 weeks of continuous daylight when children play outside at midnight, and grocery stores stay busier at 11 p.m. than they do at noon. This is not a minor inconvenience. It restructures how people sleep, work, and gather. Winter is community building season. Hockey rinks flooded in every hamlet, card games at the community hall, the Sunday potluck that becomes a lifeline against isolation. Summer, by contrast, is a sprint. Boats go in the water the moment ice breaks up. Gardens are planted and harvested in a compressed 8 to 10 week window. Hunting and fishing trips are timed with an urgency that people in temperate climates rarely feel, because the land itself is only fully accessible for a fraction of the year. Between those extremes sits break-up and freeze-up, the muddy, unstable weeks each spring and fall when ice roads become unusable and some communities are, for a short stretch, reachable only by air. Life does not pause during breakup. It simply gets more expensive and more careful. It is the ice road that vanishes into open water by mid-April, the freezer that fills every autumn with country food before the trails become impassable. The parka pulled from storage on the same weekend, almost without fail, each year. Northerners do not simply endure this cycle. They plan entire lives around it. Vacations scheduled around daylight, weddings scheduled around ice conditions, school terms quietly adjusted around the hunting calendar in communities where the land still sets the agenda more firmly than any clock. Geography defines character. The North is not one place. It is at least 4. Yukon is mountain country, dominated by the St. Elias Mountains and home to Mount Logan, Canada's highest peak at 5,959 meters. Its economy still carries the DNA of the 1898 Klondike Gold Rush, though today it runs more on mining, particularly gold and silver, alongside a growing tourism sector built around Kluane National Park and the Aurora. The Northwest Territories centers on Yellowknife, a city of roughly 21,800 people built on the shores of Great Slave Lake, one of the 10 deepest lakes on Earth. This is diamond country. Since the Ekati and Diavik mines opened in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the NWT has become one of the world's significant diamond-producing regions, an economic identity almost nobody outside Canada associates with the Arctic. Nunavut, carved out of the NWT in 1999 as the result of the largest Indigenous land claim settlement in Canadian history, is different again. A territory with no road connections to the rest of Canada at all. Every one of its 25 communities is accessible only by air, or, for a few weeks each summer, by sea. And then there is the Arctic archipelago itself, the northernmost reaches, places like Grise Fjord and Resolute, some of the northernmost permanently inhabited communities on the planet, where temperatures can fall below -40 degrees for weeks at a stretch, and the nearest full-service hospital may be 1,000 kilometers and a chartered flight away. Remote and rural extremes. Grise Fjord has fewer than 150 residents. It was established in 1953 when Inuit families from northern Quebec were relocated there by the federal government, a history the community has spent decades reckoning with. Today, groceries arrive by sea lift once a year and by costly air freight the rest of the time. A jar of jam or a can of vegetables can run several times the southern Canadian price, sometimes climbing past $30 or $40 for basic items during shortages. Survival here is not metaphorical. It means knowing how to read sea ice thickness before a snowmobile crosses it. It means maintaining traditional harvesting skills, hunting seal, narwhal, and Arctic char, not as cultural preservation exercises, but as genuine food security, because the cost of a fully store-bought diet is, for many families, simply unaffordable. It means multi-generational knowledge transfer happening not in classrooms, but on the land. An elder teaching a teenager how to build an emergency shelter in a whiteout because that knowledge, one day, may save their life. Old Crow, Yukon, a Vuntut-Gwich'in community of roughly 250 people, is the only Yukon community without regular road access and depends on year-round air service. In exceptional winters, a temporary freight road has sometimes been built from Eagle Plains for major projects, but it is not a routine connection. Old Crow relies primarily on diesel generation, supplemented by solar power that reduces the amount of fuel that must be flown into the community. Its residents still time much of the year around the porcupine caribou herd's migration, a relationship between people and animal that predates the Canadian state itself by thousands of years, and one the community has fought repeatedly to protect from resource development pressure on the herd's calving grounds across the border in Alaska. A typical day. Picture a morning in Yellowknife in late January. The sky is still black at 8 a.m. A father plugs in his truck's block heater the night before. Standard practice across the north, where engine oil can thicken to uselessness in extreme cold, and scrapes frost from the inside of the windshield before the short drive to school. His daughter's classroom has a rule that outdoor recess is cancelled below -35 degrees Celsius with wind chill, a threshold most southern Canadian schools never have to consider. At the office, workdays often start slightly later and end slightly earlier in the depths of winter, an informal accommodation to the darkness. Government employment dominates here. Roughly a third of the NWT workforce works in public administration, health, or education, a proportion far higher than in most of Canada, because in small, remote economies, government is often the largest and most stable employer. By late afternoon, the light, what there was of it, is already fading again. Dinner in many households blends the store-bought and the harvested. A pot of caribou stew alongside pasta, a family recipe passed from a grandmother who grew up on the land to grandchildren who split their time between smartphones and snowmobiles. After dinner, the rink. Nearly every northern community, no matter how small, maintains some version of an outdoor or indoor hockey rink, and on winter evenings it becomes the true town square. Kids skating under floodlights, parents watching from truck cabs kept warm against the cold, breath visible in clouds under the glow of arena lights, while somewhere above, if the skies are clear, the aurora might already be moving. Signature traditions. If there is one unifying ritual across the north, it is the relationship with hockey, not simply as a sport, but as social infrastructure, the thing that gets built first when a new community forms, and the thing that keeps people connected through the darkest months. But hockey shares the stage with older, deeper traditions. The Arctic Winter Games, held every 2 years and rotating among northern host communities, bring together athletes from across the circumpolar world. Yukon, NWT, Nunavut, Alaska, Greenland, and northern Russia and Scandinavia have all participated over the game's history. To compete not only in conventional sports, but in Dene and Inuit games, the 1-foot high kick, the knuckle hop, the airplane crawl, events that test strength, balance, and pain tolerance, developed originally as training for hunting, and survival. Alongside it sits the kulik, the traditional Inuit oil lamp, still lit at ceremonies as a living symbol of continuity rather than a museum artifact, and the springtime tradition in many Dene and Métis communities of the annual goose hunt, when entire families relocate to bush camps for weeks, an event still built directly into some school calendars in the north because its cultural importance is treated as equal to formal education. Indigenous and First Peoples. To understand the North honestly, you have to understand that Indigenous peoples are not a chapter of its history. They are its present tense. Across the three territories, Indigenous people make up just over half the combined population, a proportion roughly 10 times the national average, including Inuit across Nunavut and the Inuvialuit region of the NWT, and Dene, Métis, and numerous First Nations across the Yukon and NWT. Nunavut itself exists because of this. Its 1999 creation followed decades of negotiation over the Nunavut Land Claims Agreement, giving Inuit formal ownership and management rights over enormous tracts of land and resources, one of the most significant acts of Indigenous self-governance in modern Canadian history. In Yukon, 11 of 14 First Nations operate under self-government agreements that give them jurisdiction over land, resources, and social services in ways most Canadian municipalities do not have. This is not static. Inuktitut syllabics appear on stop signs in Iqaluit. Traditional knowledge, or Inuit Kaujimajatuqangit, is formally incorporated into Nunavut's territorial government decision-making. Land claims settlements continue to be implemented, contested, and renegotiated. It is a living relationship between government and Indigenous nations, not a settled historical account, imperfect, still evolving, and central to how the North governs itself today. Cities versus small towns. Yellowknife and Whitehorse function, in miniature, like small southern Canadian cities. Coffee shops, a symphony orchestra in Whitehorse, direct flights to Vancouver and Calgary. Housing markets that, while still expensive by national standards, remain dramatically cheaper than Toronto or Vancouver. Travel 300 kilometers outside either capital, though, and the calculation changes entirely. In fly-in communities, self-reliance is not a personality trait. It is infrastructure. A broken furnace in January cannot wait for a part to be trucked in. There is no truck route. Communities develop deep informal networks of shared skills. The person in town who can fix small engines. The person who can set bones. The person whose freezer becomes an informal community resource after a good hunt. What cities offer in convenience and anonymity, small northern towns replace with density of relationship. Everyone known, everyone to some degree responsible for everyone else. Work and the economy. The northern economy was built on extraction, and in large part, it still is. Yukon's modern economy traces directly back to Klondike-era gold, still mined today alongside silver and zinc. The NWT's economy leans heavily on diamonds, along with oil and gas activity in the Satu region. Nunavut has growing gold mining operations, including the Meadowbank and Meliadine mines near Baker Lake and Rankin Inlet, now major employers in the Kivalik region. But resource extraction alone cannot support a modern territory, and all three governments know it. Government services, healthcare, and education together now employ a larger share of the northern workforce than mining does in most communities, a genuine structural shift from the boom-bust resource economy of the 20th century towards something closer to a public sector-anchored economy, supplemented by a slowly growing tourism industry built around the aurora, wildlife viewing, and indigenous cultural tourism. The shift matters because mining jobs, however well paid, are volatile, tied to global commodity prices that can collapse a town's economy within a single fiscal year. Government and healthcare jobs offer something resource booms never could: stability that outlasts a single ore body. Cost of living, the modern paradox. Here is the paradox that defines nearly every northern household budget. Space is abundant, but almost everything that fills it is expensive. Housing costs in Yellowknife or Whitehorse run below Vancouver or Toronto, but everything shipped or flown in, food, fuel, building materials, vehicles, carries the North's defining tax, distance itself. In Iqaluit, a 4-liter jug of milk that costs roughly $5 in southern Canada can run anywhere from $8 to well over $10, even with federal subsidies through the Nutrition North program factored in. In smaller, more remote Nunavut communities, served only during a brief annual sealift season, prices can climb further still. Basic produce or juice sometimes reaching prices that would shock a shopper in Ottawa or Montreal. Food insecurity rates across Nunavut run several times the national average, disproportionately affecting Inuit families, a reality that has prompted repeated public protests and continued federal review of subsidy programs that many Northerners say still don't close the gap. This is the tension that shapes nearly every Northern life decision: the freedom of enormous, uncrowded land, set against grocery bills that would stagger someone from the South. Abundance of space, scarcity of affordability, both true, both constant. Fuel tells the same story in a different key. Heating oil and gasoline, trucked or barged in over enormous distances, routinely cost well above the national average across the territories, which means a cold snap is never purely a matter of comfort. It is a line item. Families budget for winter the way southern Canadian families might budget for a mortgage renewal, watching forecasts not for whether to bring an umbrella, but for how many extra tanks of heating fuel a hard January might demand. Nature revisited. Return for a moment to that opening idea. Cold as a co-author, not a backdrop. Consider what that authorship actually demands. It demands block heaters and extreme cold school closure policies. It demands ice roads engineered each winter to reach communities with no permanent highway access, roads that must be rebuilt from nothing every single year and that are now shortening in usable season as the Arctic warms roughly 3 times faster than the global average. And still, the same force that threatens infrastructure produces the aurora borealis that draws tourists from Tokyo and Berlin to stand in -30-degree darkness for a glimpse of green light rippling overhead. The same isolation that raises the price of milk also preserves a night sky unpolluted by any city glow for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. Beauty and hardship here are not opposites. They are the same phenomenon, viewed from different angles. Modern change. The North is not frozen in place, culturally or demographically. International migration into the territories has grown modestly in recent years, with newcomers arriving in Whitehorse, Yellowknife, and Iqaluit to fill labor shortages in healthcare, trades, and education. That growth strains systems built for much smaller populations. Yellowknife's hospital and Iqaluit's regional health center serve enormous catchment areas, and a medical evacuation, or medevac, by air remains a routine part of healthcare delivery for anyone in a fly-in community requiring specialized treatment. Housing shortages, worsened by high construction costs and permafrost-related building constraints, have become a defining political issue in all 3 territories. Permafrost itself, long considered the stable foundation beneath northern buildings and roads, is thawing in patches across the north, requiring costlier engineering and, in some cases, forcing the relocation or reinforcement of existing structures. Climate change is not an abstraction in northern policy discussions. It is a line item in territorial infrastructure budgets. The younger generation. Ask a young person in Whitehorse or Iqaluit about their future, and you will hear something more layered than simple optimism or pessimism. Nunavut has the youngest population in Canada, with a median age of roughly 27, a demographic reality that puts enormous pressure on the territory's education and job training systems to keep pace. Young Northerners inherit a genuine tension, deep pride in land, language, and community, set against a housing market that, in relative terms, prices many out of independence, and a job market still disproportionately concentrated in government and resource sectors. Some leave for post-secondary education in the South and return. Many do not, at least not immediately, drawn instead toward opportunities in Edmonton, Ottawa, or Vancouver. Others are choosing to stay and build something explicitly northern. Indigenous-owned businesses, land-based education programs, a small but growing arts and film sector rooted in northern and Indigenous storytelling. Their outlook is neither naive nor despairing. It is practical, watchful, and for many still rooted in a real sense of belonging to the land itself. Ask someone why they live somewhere the sun disappears for weeks, where a jug of milk can cost $10, where a broken-down vehicle in February is a genuine emergency, and you rarely get a grand answer. You get a small one. It is the particular blue of the light at 11 a.m. in December, just before the brief midday dusk that passes for daytime. It is a freezer full of caribou shared without being asked. It is a town small enough that the person plowing your street knows your name and knows if your truck hasn't started in 2 days that something might be wrong. People do not stay in the north, despite its difficulty. Many stay because the difficulty is bound up inseparably with everything they love about it. The same isolation that makes a lost tourist genuinely vulnerable is what preserves the intimacy, the mutual reliance, the unmediated relationship with land that drew their families north generations ago, or that never let them consider leaving in the first place. Cold, in the end, is not simply weather here. It is a shared condition, endured and in its way cherished by people who have built an entire way of life in negotiation with it. Its darkness, its distance, its cost, and its extraordinary, indifferent beauty. The North does not soften itself for the people who live there, and they do not ask it to. It is not a place you visit to escape your life. It is a place where the land itself remains, still, a constant and active presence, shaping the school calendar, the grocery bill, the hockey schedule, the hour the sun finally clears the horizon each morning. Beauty and hardship still, the same phenomenon, viewed from different angles on the same wide, quiet, unforgiving, unforgettable stretch of the earth. If this look at life above the 60th parallel moved something in you, there is more where it came from. We are not chasing postcards. We are trying to understand how people actually live, the quiet negotiations they make with their land, their weather, and their history. If that sounds like your kind of journey, subscribe and come with us to the next place few people ever truly see.